What is it?
The main thing I got from it was like this sense of feeling seen and validated.
Well, why does it have to be this way?
This book was placed in my hand for this moment.
Insightful, learned a lot, wrote some quotes that I'm ready to like paint on my wall.
I love this book!
That we just kind of pull out some of the big themes that we see and talk about a few different ones.
I apologize if most of my contribution has K-pop references.
Alternative book title, The Feminine Mystique Part 2. You were really just gay all along. Welcome to Book Club.
With Julia!
And Victoria.
Two travelers who really miss European bread and cheese. And socialized medicine. And we would like to be your book friends.
This is a podcast for the books we just can't shut up about.
And this week, we're talking about The Pairing by Casey McQuiston, a queer romance novel about two exes, a sommelier and a pastry chef, accidentally going on the same massive European food and wine tour together, and, because they are so unbelievably emotionally mature, having a hookup competition instead of talking about their feelings. This book is also secondarily, but in a very close second, about smells. You have no idea how many ways a smell can be described. There were so many times when I was like, I understand that that's what's in the drink, but there's no way you smell that. Like, I understand that there are these types of things in this city, but there's no way it has a smell.
I mean, Theo is a sommelier. Like, that's what their finessed skill is.
Right. Just like a super sniffer.
Yeah. A heads up, there will be spoilers ahead, so we'll be talking about the entirety of the book, including some big plot reveals. If you care about spoilers, please hit pause, go read the book, come back and join us. But whether you've read it or not, you are welcome here to our discussion of this book that we love so dearly.
Yes. Very quickly, if you'd like to support us, you can rate, review, subscribe on any podcast platform that you're on. Send us comments and questions on Spotify. Those always make me really excited. Send us book requests. Things you'd like us to cover. We are also on buymeacoffee.com/bookclubwithjv. If you'd like to buy us a coffee one time or join the club. Got all of our archived episodes. We've got bonus content for our Vampire and the Octopus monster series that we ended up doing all last year. Don't ask. And this will only be 3 months. Takes an entire year. And then any book links in the show notes will go to our bookshop.org page, where if you purchase a book, we get a very small kickback. So yeah, we're so happy to have you here. It could not be more typical book club with Julia and Victoria than talking about a Casey McQuiston novel.
We've talked about it extensively off mic.
Oh, of course. Of course. I will be referencing a very long WhatsApp thread in our discussion today. So it's been a minute since we read this, actually. So what was your experience?
So The Pairing was one of my rare pre-orders. I know pre-ordering means a lot for authors. If there's a debut author I really am interested to see, or someone I know tangentially, or an author I absolutely adore, I will go out of my way to pre-order, and that was Casey McQuiston. Pretty much as soon as the pre-orders were announced on Instagram, I'm like, add to cart, purchase, buy. Send all my money. And it's also so fun when you pre-order, because then you like get it in the mail months later. I got my little like notification from like whatever app tells me that I have a package on the way, and I like was racking my brain. I'm like, what did I buy myself? I think I even got the message during one of those like weeks where I'm like, I gotta spend less. I need to rein this in. Like, I'm gonna really focus on my budget. I'm like, what did I buy in my sleep that I forgot? No, it was a book I pre-ordered 3 months before, but I had chosen to not read or listen to any interviews, reviews, or press about the book. I've hardly even read Casey McQuiston's own Instagram post promoting it, because I was like, I'm all in. I care about this book, and like, I've had Casey McQuiston novels minorly spoiled by the press releases.
Oh, yeah.
And PR.
Looking at you, one last stop.
Yeah, one last stop. Give me the plot twist. On the back cover. Anyway, so I was just like, I'll happily enter this blind. And all I knew was the cover art, which alluded to like Europe. So I was like, okay, so we're traveling. And I knew something about like two raging bisexuals was part of like some of the promo I'd seen. And so actually the reveal that Theo is non-binary, it was only spoiled to me after a few chapters when I told Julia, like, I'm really enjoying this book, but I'm kind of surprised that like Casey McQuiston has like both a male and female lead. And Julia was like, isn't one of them non-binary, and also like just wait. And then I had to go examine my own gendered assumptions about characters and have a little sit with myself, and it was a delight. I really enjoyed also the way that McQuiston wrote Theo's character and the conversation between Theo and Kit, and how that ends up being kind of this turning point in the book where we get to flip point of view. And it was really well done, I thought, writing style wise.
Yeah, I mean, you read it the way it was truly meant to be read, where it was like a gradual discovery of Theo's gender alongside them. Because, I mean, they do use she, her pronouns.
Well, I went back and reread, right? Because I was like only a couple chapters in, and I was like, why do I assume? It's only when Theo is reading a news article about themselves where the journalist refers to Theo with she, her pronouns, but Theo never does. And the way that McQuiston writes it, no one else ever uses Theo's pronouns. So that Theo doesn't have to correct them.
Kit doesn't even?
Kit does later.
I thought Kit did.
I'm going to have to do a control F on she if I had the Kindle version. Unfortunately, I don't.
Because I think it's when we're in Kit's POV, he refers to them as she. And like when he's talking about them to anyone else until Theo explains it. But it's not coming from Theo's own mouth. I just remember that Kit has to be corrected.
Yeah, so overall, the book was an absolute delight. I really enjoyed both of our main characters. The Theo is my favorite, perhaps because I relate a lot to their, like, inner turmoil. It's as if McQuiston found my inner vulnerability and stuck it at the heart of this character, which I often feel reading Casey McQuiston novels, which makes me think that the two of us might just be very similar people. Dealing with, you know, life in similar ways.
The way that you so deeply relate to at least one character in every single one of their novels really tells me a lot more about you and what your internal monologue is like.
Okay, so I was flipping through today to review, and you had sent the copy back to me.
Oh, it's got all my notes in it.
And it's got all your notes, which I hadn't flipped through and read until today. And I found one when Kit and Theo are realizing both of them misunderstood. Like, they thought the other person was leaving them when they broke up many years ago. And you wrote in the margins, literally, Victoria's worst nightmare. And I was like, oh, she understands me. It would be my worst nightmare to end a relationship and then learn 4 years later that the person hadn't left me. They thought I left them.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
I think I was specifically referring to because you hate dramatic irony. You hate it. I think I was referring to the dramatic irony and not like if you were actually in that situation.
That's so funny because it's also 100% true.
Yes.
Oh, I'm really glad this story was not told with us both knowing, right? Like if McQuiston had chosen to put Theo and Kit's point of view alternating,
it would have driven you mad. You would have been
driven me mad. I'd been like, oh my gosh, just talk to each other. Okay, we're really getting ahead of ourselves, so let's tell me what you thought of the book, and then we'll get into some summary and author bio stuff.
First of all, this book is unbelievably, like, decadent. It feels like the ghost of Christmas Present, like, wrote a book. Like, it's, like, so indulgent and so horny. My God, It's so horny. I was not prepared. Like, I knew, and yet I did not know. You know, I think similar to you, I preferred Theo's point of view. Kit pissed me off a little, I'm not gonna lie. He is likable, but he's like too likable. He's so dramatic. He's so dramatic. But his redeeming quality is how in love with Theo he is. And I feel like we sort of could bond over that. Of like, yes, I also prefer Theo's point of view. Let's bond. But it's also like Theo's been building him up as this kind of larger than life perfect person. You get in his brain and you're like, okay, little guy. just a man.
I'm realizing now that I pictured Kit as just like a short Timothy Chalamet.
Yes! But like buffer. Maybe a little more tan.
It was also one of those things, you know, when you start picturing a character and then you get more details about them and you can't like rewrite it. I could never imagine Kit as buff. I know he kept being described that way, but he was just like a short, little, skinny Timothy Chalamet.
Oh, that's so funny. I think I had seen too much official art to picture him any other way. Like, in my mind, they're the same height, because that's how they're drawn in all the official art. Yeah, and I think also him, like, getting all up in his head in the romance and just kind of making decisions for Theo's life, like, also really pissed me off.
Yeah.
One of my biggest, like, pet peeve red flags, like, absolutely not, you know? And then also, like, the spice level way past my sort of preference. So, yeah, it's a lot. It's a lot. But I had a lot of fun, and I loved all the Lord of the Rings references. I'm going to get into them later. I think it's hilarious that Casey McQuiston is, like, physically incapable of writing a book without an undiagnosed ADHD character in it. So this is a solid second place for me. Red, White, and Royal Blue, The Pairing, One Last Stop. I haven't read I Kissed Char Wheeler. I have a feeling I'm going to like that one.
I agree with your ranking. It's hard to beat Red, White, and Royal Blue because that's like the introduction point, right? Like that was like the beginning of like, oh my gosh.
There was no comparison at that point.
So The Pairing is like maybe a very close second. Depending on the day, might be go into first place for me. Third is Char Wheeler, and fourth is One Last Stop.
So we've talked about Casey McQuiston. This is our third time. Do you have anything new to share?
Yeah, so I was going to do a little bit of a recap for those who haven't gone back and listened to those episodes. Casey McQuiston is an American novelist known for their queer romantic fiction. They were born in Baton Rouge, Louisiana in 1991 and grew up attending an evangelical Christian school and Catholic Mass on the weekends. I was listening to a really great interview on, I think it's called ADHD Aha, or Aha ADHD. It's basically like ADHDers talking about like the aha moment of when they figured out something about their neurodivergence.
Cute. Yeah.
Casey grew up in a family, their mom is a social worker and like was very like ahead of the curve for like early 90s, early 2000s to understand like that her kids are neurodivergent. And so Casey's sisters are also ADHD and dyslexic. Casey is not dyslexic, but ADHD. And so it was interesting for me. I'll link in the show notes to learn more about their experience with neurodivergence. And it makes sense that it is infused in so much of their writing.
Yes.
In university, Casey studied journalism and worked in magazine publishing, and eventually returned to their first love, rom-com storytelling, with their debut novel, Red, White, and Royal Blue, which was a bestseller and later made into a movie. Following that, McQuiston published the sapphic romance One Last Stop, the YA novel I Kissed Char Wheeler, and then released The Pairing, which came out in the summer of 2024. McQuiston is known for creating very memorable characters and writing both endearing romances as well as beautiful friendships alongside that. And I think a large credit for McQuiston's characterization is probably to credit how much that McQuiston infuses themselves into various characters to give that kind of three-dimensionality of being a person, not just a character in a rom-com that's kind of flat. So relevant to Theo, Casey is non-binary, was raised as a girl. Similar to Theo, they're a public figure that had to navigate coming out as queer and trans in a very public way. Mm-hmm. And relevant to Kit, McQuiston lost their father as when Casey was a young adult. In an interview on Canadian podcast Bookends with Matea Roach, McQuiston shared how grieving the death of their father was a part of what pushed them to finally try their hand at writing novels, as it was something that they had always dreamed of and kind of thought it was impractical as a career choice, but it actually worked out really well for them.
Yeah.
So in a way, we see Kit chase his artistic dreams as a pastry chef in a way to stay connected to the memory of his mom, who's an artist. And so we kind of see that parallel in McQuiston's life as well. And of course, research for this book had to include a food and wine tour of Europe. How could it not? McQuiston shared in the Bookends interview a few of the tours, like the chocolate tour and the pastry tour in this book, are just like writing down exactly what they ate.
Wow.
when they went on these tours with locals in different parts of Europe. And yeah, my mom always, encourages my own writing, and it's also partially a bit selfish because she's always like, you could write a book about insert exotic location here or insert very interesting city here. And she's like, we can go together for your research. I'm like, we can also just travel, Mom.
Yeah.
But yeah, I'll write a book someday.
That's so funny.
She's just looking out for me. We can write it off as a business expense.
Yeah. Yeah, I remember following their Instagram when they were in Europe for months and months and months. I remember being so jealous, being like, man, their publisher sent them to Europe to write, for a writer's retreat, right? I thought it was the location has nothing to do with the book. It's just sending them there to go finish the book. And then seeing all the details in promo for the book and realizing like, oh, all of these locations were actual things that they did. And I was like drooling. I was, oh my God, this is so great.
So now that we've hinted at so many plot points, please let us know what is this book?
I realized this summary I've written is more the emotional narrative and doesn't have a ton of the actual plot points. So feel free to fill in things I've forgotten. Okay. So we start in Theo's point of view, as we've discussed, ambiguously maybe using she, her pronouns. We have not been corrected. And we know at the beginning of the book that they've had a dramatic breakup with their ex-boyfriend Kit in the London Heathrow airport when they were about to go on this massive food and wine tour together 4 years ago. Theo is part of a like old Hollywood family with super famous parents and siblings. They're the only one who like doesn't work in the industry. They were like a swimmer and then they got injured and now they're a bartender / sommelier. So there is that feeling of like black sheep of the family. They didn't end up actually going on the tour because they broke up in the airport. They got like a voucher and this is the last year that they can use it. It makes a lot of sense that they end up going on this tour together. But yeah, Theo shows up trying to take advantage of this tour, trying to have a fresh start in a way, only to find that Kit has had the same idea and now they have to go on this trip together as exes. Theo is very clearly still in love with Kit, but also very mad at him. And so they decide to deal with their feelings by suggesting a hookup competition where they each try to sleep with someone on each stop of the tour. And the whole thing very quickly turns into a way that they can like vicariously have sex with each other through other people because they're like so unbelievably horny. But Theo thinks that Kit has this whole life with like this French girlfriend and a perfect job and a patisserie, like a perfect apartment in Paris that he inherited from his uncle, and like no longer wants anything to do with Theo's sort of chaotic self. By the end of Theo's point of view, they've made it through France and Spain, I believe, most of Spain. Theo finally acknowledges that they're still in love with Kit and is kind of like pretending to sleep with people so as not to give that fact away. And then we switch into Kit's point of view and we immediately realize that Kit is so down bad for Theo, but thinks that Theo has moved on because they seem to be doing so well and so blasé, and they're just like so comfortable in their skin now and just like this sex god in this hookup competition. But Kit is sort of willing to take whatever Theo is willing to give. And so as they make their way through the end of Spain into Italy, they finally start sleeping together, but with all these rules. They basically use like the Pretty Woman rules. And then, of course, because they're madly in love with each other, they keep breaking those rules. It's sort of a process where with each like physical boundary that they open up with each other and consent, it's mutually consenting before it happens every time. They also reach a degree of emotional intimacy as well and get kind of reacquainted with each other sexually and emotionally. So they're talking about their present fears and anxieties, that their lives are not as perfect as they seem. They talk about what happened with the breakup and realize that Kit had not left Theo. Kit had just gone to buy new tickets, right?
Theo got the tickets on their phone and sent the screenshots to Kit, but only one screenshot went through. So it looked like Theo was just like, I have my ticket, I'm leaving.
Yeah.
Not realizing that the other ticket didn't go through.
Kit was just crying in the bathroom.
Yeah, or like
his dramatic ass
went to go get the bags or something like that.
Okay, thank you.
Also, one of my worst fears.
Yes.
Just like a severe misunderstanding because like a text message didn't go through.
Oh my God.
Like that realization when you're like the miniature version of this is when you realize like an email got stuck in your outbox because you like hit send on the end of a workday and just slapped the laptop closed till Monday, and then you open and you're like, oh my gosh, that never sent.
Yes. And it caused so many years of heartbreak, right? Like this one bad text that didn't go through is suddenly like years and years of them not speaking to each other. And so they finally like talk about what happened afterwards and how they felt and like realizing it was kind of no one's fault in a way. And then also the most personal reveal of like Theo coming out as non-binary. And then the last step is they acknowledge that they love each other. Like their dramatic asses are, they decide to let themselves be in love for 24 hours, like some kind of, before sunrise kind of situation, as if they can only be friends after this, that being in love and dating is impossible. So they have this sort of last hurrah that's very beautiful, and they're like, wow, we're so in love, and it could never last. And then they leave the tour, and Kit goes home to his apartment in Paris. So he gets inspired by his mother's words that were sort of hidden on the back of one of her paintings. Theo has a layover in Paris, and so Kit's like, I'm gonna go get them. And then he opens the door, and there is Theo clutching a letter that Kit had written, and because it had Kit's address on it, and so they were able to find him. They both have this dramatic, like, I don't want to break up. I still love you. Let's try this. And then they have a lot of sex about it. We learn in the epilogue that they've opened a bakery in the south of France with like a bunch of people they made friends with while they were there. And Theo is going to ask Kit to marry them. Very cute. And the entire time they're just like eating so much food and drinking so much wine and having so much sex that it's just like impossible to cover it all. And that's the emotional arc of this plot. Is there any like physical plot points that
I think there's
missed?
two elements that feel really important to me in understanding these characters. One is that Theo and Kit grew up together as like best friends. And so they already had kind of like a friends to lovers relationship when they were friends for so long, and they were roommates and they were roommates.
Literally, yeah.
We get it from mostly Theo's point of view early on in the book. So it's a lot of like the unrequited love. Like Theo's like, Kit is amazing. Like, why would he ever love me? And then they finally get together. And then they broke up. And then this is where the book's starting, right? It's 4 years after that breakup. So importantly, they know a lot about each other. And they know about each other's families and each other's like kind of like childhood grief. So Theo was there when Kit lost his mother. And Kit was there as Theo was trying to figure out like their kind of place in their famous family and deciding not to go into the industry and kind of like figuring out what that would be. They worked at a restaurant together. The breakup was kind of Theo's push to start figuring themselves out. And it was like when they came out to themselves and when they started their own business and that's another whole subplot of the book is Theo grappling with like their business that's like kind of falling apart and they're feeling like I fucked it up so many times. This is like the one thing I have that I built for myself and they're super proud of. And they're about to take the sommelier exam, but they failed it the first time because tests are hard and being a sommelier is hard, but they're really, really skilled. The part that I really resonated with Theo was that sense of like, just that like uncertainty about self and like the career. Mm-hmm. And for Theo, it was needing to go through this like emotional, devastating period where then they got the like energy to move forward and figure it out for themselves. And so that's also what Theo's grappling with when they realize that the breakup was a misunderstanding, because it was like, oh my gosh, all this anger I had that fueled this really positive transformation in my life was actually out of nothing. Like, what does that mean for my life story about like, I was fueled by this kind of unfounded, well, it was understandable at the time given the information they had, but ultimately unfounded idea of what happened in the breakup. So, and there's a lot of really awesome, like, other characters. This one doesn't have as much of, like, the band of friends that McQuiston writes in a lot of other novels, but we do have, like, other people on the tour. There's these two Callums that are best friends.
The Callums!
The Callums, blonde Callum and ginger Callum.
I was shipping them so hard.
So that's, like, a fun side plot. And the tour guide is a lovely character.
Oh, incredible.
That's so sexy, and both Kit and Theo are trying to like get with him, and they were like this hilarious scene where they think they're getting invited to a threesome with the tour guide, and they show up and it's the tour guide and his wife having them over for wine. Like the bus driver or whatever.
So
and
cute.
they like,
what is his name? Fabrizio?
Yeah.
Fabrizio. Very, very fun.
So there's all the lovely ups and downs of like a rom-com. They're put in silly situations. They're like, you know, having these emotional moments, but you really got to the heart of this emotional arc of what's happening through the story, which I think will help us as we move into our discussion about kind of the type of genre this fits into and McQuiston's work as a whole, including a tangent about Lord of the Rings, which is very interesting. I'm excited for you to share with everyone.
Thank you.
One thing I found really interesting is how this book kind of sits in like the tradition of travel literature, because while there is this lovely romance story happening, McQuiston really brings us to each place. There's a lot of talk about art and food and architecture and wine and beverages and like history. And I feel like I went on a journey reading the book in the way that travel guides of yore were like, dear friends back home,
Yes.
here are my travels and traipsing through the Italian landscapes, written back to you to make you feel like you were there or make you jealous. Maybe both.
One that stands out in my mind in particular is from Kit's POV in Florence.
Yes. There is perhaps nothing as true, as enduring, as fitting a tribute to the Renaissance as being so horny you could die on the streets of Florence.
And it, like, goes into, you know, like, Michelangelo and just all the Italian Renaissance painters and sculptors being so horny for each other. And I was like, yeah, that is 100% correct.
Kit's background was in art history, so, like, it also makes sense with the character that he would just know this stuff, right? So, Filippo Lippi was a Carmelite monk when he fell for the nun who sat for his paintings of the Madonna. Botticelli yearned so passionately for his muse, Simonetta, that he painted her as Venus 10 years after her death. Da Vinci wanted to hate-fuck Michelangelo, while Michelangelo was so obsessed with the young Tommaso Cavalieri that he sculpted himself in submission between the nude lord's legs and called it victory. Raphael essentially died of exhaustion from too much painting and fucking. And I am standing on the black stones outside a cafeteria watching Theo eat a pastry.
Oh, so good. Yeah, that's the whole book right there. That's the entire... There's, like, history drop that puts you in a sense of time and place. There's just, like, the decadence of just, like, eating food and then horniness. Like, that is the book right there. The travel literature specifically, they basically follow what's called the Grand Tour, which was something rich Northern European, Western European folks would do in, like, particularly in the Romantic era. So you imagine Byron, like, fucking his way through Europe, right? This is what we're talking about. But it has a specific trajectory, and it starts in Dover. I was kind of curious that there was a chapter set in Dover, because I'm like, there's nothing there except the ferry. Like, why would you I'll include a whole chapter about that. But it was like, no, because the Grand Tour starts in Dover. So you've got to go there first. It goes through France, and then sometimes they go, McQuiston skipped this part, but sometimes they go over into Switzerland to, like, Basel and Lausanne, where there's, like, a bunch of, like, art and stuff over there. But instead McQuiston had them go through Spain, and then, because they got to go to, like, Monaco and stuff, which refers to kind of the Americans abroad tradition, which I'll get to in a second. And then you go through Rome all the way down, and then sometimes you could rent a yacht and go to Sicily. But that was, like, a big deal. But the book ends in Sicily, and then they go back to Paris.
Palermo.
Yeah. Like, this is literally following the Grand Tour, which, like, it was supposed to be this kind of formative journey through art history, through food, through language, this kind of decadent learning experience. And then they would often write about it and publish books about it. And then even the rich Americans caught on. Like, I think it's referenced in Gone with the Wind. Like, there's a certain point where, like, wealthy Americans started catching on and started doing it too. It was, like, a thing that you had to do as, like, your gap year or something, you know?
Like, one of Mark Twain's, like, most famous books, Innocents Abroad, is a satire.
Yes!
Based off his experience doing the Grand Tour. It kind of caught on for Americans a little bit later, because the Europeans were like, we have trains now, it's so fast. Like, we don't have to spend years doing it. But the Americans were like, it still takes us a long, long boat ride to get there. So we'll go once in our 20s, and that's our Grand Tour.
And, like, one of the most famous, around when the Americans started doing it, is also when women were finally allowed to do it as well. And so Kit is actually reading E.M. Forster's novel, A Room with a View, which is about a woman going on the Grand Tour. It would be a young woman with, like, an older woman chaperone would often take them. And it's about her, like, falling in love in Italy with another man who's doing the same thing. And so Kit is, like, reading that book the entire time. And so there's a very, like, direct reference to the exact journey they're taking, which I thought was just fun and wonderful. And it gives it this sense of like, it feels like they're taking part in this kind of very, very old tradition. But specifically from the American point of view, right? Because there is also this sort of Americans in post-war Europe kind of artistic renaissance, Roman holiday. Like we have this kind of idealized image of like Americans in Europe kind of thing. You think of Baldwin.
Yeah, there was kind of like two big literary waves after both the wars, right? Like after World War I, there was like Gertrude Stein and Ernest Hemingway and Henry James and like that kind of wave. And then like the next generation after World War II, like Baldwin in the 40s.
I think you outlined some things here, but there's a few things that are kind of essential to it. And one of them, the only way to make this story kind of believable in contemporary literature is how privileged these people have to be in order to make this story work.
Yeah, and that's kind of something that's not reflective in the previous generations' versions of these stories, which is there was always privilege, right? You always had to have money and wealth and opportunity. You had to have a chaperone. You had to have servants to carry your stuff. Like, it is often tied hand in hand. And so for McQuiston to pick up this kind of literary tradition of writing about these grand tours, whether people are writing it fictionalized or actual accounts of their own journeys, was to also pick up this privilege with a 2024 lens of like, how do we acknowledge that for our characters? It is such the like fantasy of like falling in love and having a small little shop in southern France, like on the coast, and like living out your days in simplicity and harmony. And it's just like, it could read as so annoying if it hadn't been handled with the care I think that McQuiston gave it, which is, okay, it's a lot of privilege, so let's make sure our characters have privilege. And we will talk about it, and it'll be like very present about them. It will also be a part of their own understanding of self. For Theo, coming from a Hollywood family, it's a very like far-fetched thing that not many of us have the experience of being the child of famous film directors, but it's brought down to a relatability of like, what are family expectations? What does it mean to try to eke out your own name for yourself when you're living under the shadow of your family, whether it's a shadow in your hometown or a shadow on like a public stage like Theo's is. For Kit, it's not just that he has the privilege of both EU, or like French EU and US passport status. He's got citizenship in both places that allows for the French dream of like owning a business and moving there permanently. But he also, his character struggles are a bit of being the foreigner in America, right? He moved there as like a middle schooler and had a hard time adjusting to life in America after growing up in France. And there's some things that are like a little hand wavy, like what does his family do that his uncle owned a flat in Paris that he's willing to just give as like an early inheritance because his uncle is still alive. But it grounds the characters in like a relatability of like being an outsider, trying to make a name for yourself, but does it in a way that works for the plot. Like we can make it happen that they end up in Europe. And they acknowledge things like visas and passports and time it might take to be settled in a new country. Kit's able to move back there because he got into a French patisserie school, things like that. So it allows for two people with American citizenship to take multiple weeks vacation and drink their way through Europe and move to a small French town to start the little boutique business. So we can have our really fantastical happily ever after without it being like too far-fetched.
I felt like the book had a good balance of the characters like wrestling with their own family legacies and their own privilege and simultaneously allowing it to be that kind of fantasy. Because it is a fantasy of like, I mean, I mentioned at the top, socialized medicine, accessible public transportation. Not that Paris is particularly accessible for like mobility aids and stuff, I will say. And they still use like old school Freudian psychoanalysis to treat autism, which is pathologically insane. But like in general, right, there's this sort of idealized image that I think a lot of American people might have of like, oh, wouldn't it be nice to not have to struggle in my day-to-day life like I do and have everything be so hard. And so there is this sort of indulgent fantasy element to it, but also that is acknowledged and the characters still feel like real people.
So let's talk about the romantic genre themes. So this is like a theme of former lovers. We also have this theme of misunderstanding, miscommunication, which has thrust forward so many romantic plots in the rom-com genre. It's just a misunderstanding. Usually I hate it, but it's usually you can tell there was a misunderstanding. And this one you really don't know until it's revealed. So you don't have to live too long with the like, wait a second, is that what really happened?
Yeah.
You don't have to scream at them, if you would just talk to each other. Which you do a little bit when you get to Kit's POV, because they still have, like, the two characters haven't really emotionally connected yet, but you get to see into Kit's brain. So I think one reason why I didn't, like, cringe at the misunderstanding trope is that we live in Theo's point of view for the first half of the novel. So we don't actually know fully what the misunderstanding was until the characters start talking about it. It's not like a dramatic irony where we're observing the fact that they both are operating under different assumptions, but they're not talking to each other. We actually get them talking to each other, and that's when they realize they were both wrong about how the relationship ended. It's also interesting, this is the first of McQuiston's novels that has a split POV. Red, White, and Royal Blue, are we only in Alex's point of view?
Yeah. There's a special edition of the novel with an epilogue from Henry's POV.
So yeah, in Red, Bright, and Royal Blue, we stick with just Alex, the first son's point of view.
You were very surprised by that, I remember. You kept, like, waiting. Like, when do we get Henry's point of view?
I kept waiting for Henry's point of view, and we never get it, except, like you said, a special edition epilogue. One Last Stop, we're never in Jane's point of view, only in the main character. I Kiss Shara Wheeler, same deal. And so McQuiston's stepping into new territory, but of course, as I think a very interesting and innovative romance writer, they weren't going to do the traditional one chapter in one point of view, a second chapter back and forth. They literally just split the novel in half, though we do get a final epilogue back in Theo's point of view. I think it really helps us feel emotionally grounded into each character. I think sometimes when you're flip-flopping back and forth, it leaves you feeling a bit like you never get settled with one, or maybe you see both sides of it too quickly, and so like the emotional payoff of them getting together is like a little weakened. I think this one was really strong because we build up this expectation of who Kit is through Theo's point of view, and then we swap to Kit, and like you said earlier, he's just a dude.
Yeah.
And he thinks the world of Theo, and so it's also really beautiful knowing how much Theo has negative self-talk, because we've been in their brain, that Kit doesn't, that's not what they see when they look at Theo. They see this really wonderful person. And you had some really great analogies of how this maps onto characters in Lord of the Rings.
Yeah, so I feel like I had a layer of reading, of understanding this book, and how these characters see each other through all the Lord of the Rings references, because there's always, like, one Lord of the Rings reference in every novel, but this one was filled with them. In every Casey McQuiston novel, I mean, not in every novel on Earth. Excuse me.
I wasn't going to correct you, but I loved the idea that you're like, if you look hard enough, there's Lord of the Rings in every novel. I mean, even the ones that came out before Lord of the Rings.
I mean, every single fantasy novel, if it has the word orc in it, like, Tolkien invented those. But anyway. Every single Casey McQuiston novel will have, like, one Lord of the Rings reference, but this one has so many. To the point where, like, there's some overt ones, right? And then there's just some that, like, you only get if you've, like, read the books or seen the movies 12 million times. It was so fun with the Easter eggs, but it also added this sort of layer to my understanding of how the characters saw each other and how they saw themselves. And so I am going to call this segment, Who is the Elf? I'm going to start in Kit's point of view, even though the book starts in Theo's point of view, because we get Kit's tattoo pretty early on, but Theo does not have the patience to read the Silmarillion, which is the prequel history text to The Hobbit and the Lord of the Rings that, yes, I have read. That, like, if you don't know the reference, he doesn't explain it.
It's in French, I say, a little disappointed. He's quiet while the ocean laps against his chest. I read the book in French first, he says finally. It means, surpasses all jewels. Huh, cool. It's been ages since I read The Silmarillion for Kit, but the phrase sounds familiar. So they had read the book. It was just...
They probably just didn't retain any of the information.
That is true love.
That is true. Reading the Silmarillion for someone when you don't care. Wow. Yeah, that is true love.
In the margins, you wrote, oh shit, Lutheran? Or what's his name? Luthien? Oh no, my boy is in love.
Yeah, so it kind of gave the game away for me a little bit. And that was when I was locked into, like, oh, there's going to be, like, Lord of the Rings is important to the plot. So then I was, like, really paying attention for all of it. That quote is Beren describing Luthien. And this is this sort of famous epic love story that Tolkien based on his own marriage. And their graves say, his says Beren and his wife says Luthien on it. And it also is sort of mirrored in the love story of Aragorn and Arwen in The Lord of the Rings, which you might be more familiar with. So basically, Beren is this ordinary, regular, degular, mortal man. And Luthien is like the daughter of the elf king and also a literal angel, a Maya. Beren and Luthien fall in love just like dancing in the forest, essentially.
As one does.
As you do. And her father basically says, oh, you want to marry my daughter? Okay, go to hell and kill the devil and then come back. And Beren is like, all right. And so he does. And then Luthien helps him. They sort of defeat the devil with the power of love. And Luthien gives up her immortality to be with him. And they create this royal line of the kings of Numenor, which is the line that Aragorn comes from, and then also the elves of Rivendell. So Aragorn and Arwen are technically like very distant cousins, which is weird. But that they ultimately work together to bring about the destruction of Sauron, centuries later, sort of completing the work that Beren and Luthien had started with the power of their love. So they like change Middle-earth forever by Kit having that description of Luthien tattooed on him. Kit sees himself as Beren and Theo as the elf. And also he sees their love as this sort of all-consuming epic love story. But in particular, the thing that stands out for me is the way that Kit has built up Theo in his mind as specifically a very, very feminine elf maiden, right? She's sort of the epitome of femininity, like the perfected femininity, right, in Tolkien's work. We sort of see how much Kit has built up Theo to be more than they are, ethereal and perfect. We also understand like how Theo has no idea how big Kit's love is still, right? We have Kit fundamentally creating this narrative about Theo that like isn't really grounded in who they are as like a real human being. And then on the flip side, the way that Theo talks about Kit is filled with a lot of references from the movies, right? Theo makes a lot of film references in this book, right? And it makes sense. Their parents work in the industry. Their siblings work in the industry. And so they quote and reference the Lord of the Rings films a lot. They're not always, like, credited. There's this one in particular that made me, that sort of clicked for me how Theo thinks about their relationship with Kit. And it's the scene from the movies, from Return of the King, where Legolas is an elf and Gimli is a dwarf. And elves and dwarves have always hated each other, and they're just sort of very opposite people. But Legolas and Gimli have sort of joined the Fellowship of the Ring as representatives of their respective races, really, to sort of join together to defeat Sauron, destroy the ring, right? And so they're in this forced proximity thing where they have kind of a love-hate, bantery kind of relationship. And they're constantly in competitions. When they go into battle, they compete to see who can kill the most orcs. And in Return of the King, Legolas's hair is always perfect, and he's killing orcs, and then he kills an elephant, which we feel very sad for the elephants, but he kills an elephant, and it's this whole dramatic sequence that's like larger than life and impossible. And then he slides down the elephant's nose and lands in front of Gimli and gives him this little like smirk, like top that. And Gimli just goes, that still only counts as one. And Casey McQuiston quotes that in this fucking novel when Kit takes home multiple people. And Theo goes, that still only counts as one.
I did not catch that reference at all. I saw that in your notes when I was flipping through, and you were like, oh my gosh, or whatever. And I was like, I don't know the reference.
Yeah, because it's from the films, which
that's really
you
funny.
Famously have watched only the end of Return of the King. And the first movie. You have seen the first movie that I held you at gunpoint on my birthday and made you watch it. There's also a bunch of jokes about how Legolas and Gimli, like, because they're kind of alone, like the rest of their peoples have sailed away or are dead. So they end up spending like the rest of their lives together, basically. And it's like very gay. You know, it's like an enemies to lovers kind of thing. It's very cute. That was what clicked into place for me, where I was like, oh, because Theo also describes Kit with a lot of the language that Gimli uses when he's like kind of making fun of Legolas, which is like, he calls him an elfling. It's kind of positive, but also kind of condescending and also kind of jealous, and it's like complicated. I can't stand you, you're too perfect. It's more of a bantery kind of relationship, and it also made me realize, like, oh, Theo sees themselves as this kind of hard-drinking, dirty, grumpy little dwarf. To Kit's, like, perfect, his hair is always perfect, he's this kind of sex god. It made me realize how much I sent Victoria so many long texts about this, but it made me realize
very long.
You were like, I think that's a whole episode right there. It made me realize that how much they have built up these stories about each other in their heads that are not real. They each see the other person as a kind of elf that's like untouchable. And I am just this, like, bleh person. And neither one is exactly right, but they also are kind of right. You know, like, they're seeing themselves too negatively, and they're seeing the other person too positively, right? They've built up this kind of dichotomy for each other that isn't real. I just thought that was, like, a brilliant layer to add. The stories they're telling in their head, like, that's a big part of the misunderstanding, is they have to, like, get reacquainted with each other as actual human beings and not as these perfect creatures who have deigned to spend their time with a gross human like me, you know? Thank you for coming to my TED Talk.
I find it so interesting, and like, I would love to talk to McQuiston about many things, but especially what they were thinking with all the Lord of the Ring references. Yes. Like, if you're like 100% spot on with your reading, even if you're not, I think they would find it absolutely fascinating. I would hope, because I find it fascinating. And I think that is what is also so beautiful of their relationship, is that kind of rediscovery of each other as more authentic people. And I mean, it's one of those, like, hindsight is 2020. It seems like they both needed to be away from each other to have like, for Theo to be like, I am my own person, because that was a big conflict in their first relationship, was like Kit kind of like dictating Theo's life for them and like letting Theo use Kit as a crutch, but also Kit like just making decisions for Theo. And that's what ultimately kind of blows up when they go to London the first time. I love the realness of that, of like, some people in their young 20s can grow with their partner, and sometimes being apart is what allows them to grow into themselves. And so it's kind of beautiful to see an example where these two people who grew and became more authentic versions of themselves could come back together at a time that worked for both of them to like be at a point to rekindle that relationship. It was really fun to read.
Yeah, you can kind of see how like they were a little codependent as kids, because like Theo was so lonely and Kit was so fish out of water. Like the way Kit they both described their first meeting, and it is immediately they created those stories. Like immediately, before they really knew each other. They really did have to kind of get reacquainted with each other in order to have like a relationship that could really last the test of time.
Yeah.
Because it was built on kind of very traumatized child shaky ground.
Yeah.
They grew in directions that made them even more compatible. And so that's really fun to like watch and realize like, oh, they're in a position to be even more in love than they ever thought possible back when they were teenagers.
And it really feels like they are building a new relationship. Like, yes, they have history together, but I think that's another thing that feels believable, that this is a happy ending. It's not two people falling back into a destructive pattern. Is that it seems very much like a fresh start, a new relationship.
Especially with Theo's gender, it feels like it could never have fully worked unless they both knew that Theo was non-binary. Because I think Theo wasn't fully comfortable in their body and was trying to perform in a particular way as like Kit's girlfriend. And then Kit had a certain more feminine image of Theo that I think was restricting as well. And so there's so much more freedom, I feel like, when they come back together. That's really great. This is our third Casey McQuiston novel that we've talked about on the podcast. I thought it would be interesting to review, like, what have we learned? How does this book fit into their oeuvre? One of the worst French words ever created.
Yeah, so it seems like a lot of Casey McQuiston's books seem to chart along with their personal journey that they've shared publicly. And so Red, White, and Royal Blue is about discovering queer sexuality. One of the characters like realizes that he's bisexual in that book, and this kind of charts with McQuiston's own journey that they've shared. They actually were not out as queer when they wrote the book. In an interview I was listening to, they were saying like, yeah, I got a lot of flack because, you know, reporters would be like, who's this straight woman writing about gay romance? And they're like wrong on 2 accounts, like 0 for 2 on accuracy there, but they weren't yet out publicly. And then One Last Stop is about discovering queer community and history. And it was also interesting to learn that McQuiston wrote that book while they were like living with roommates in, I believe, Fort Collins, Colorado, like that kind of like young adult just trying to find their way, lots of roommates, which is a lot of One Last Stop. I Kiss Share a Wheel is about kind of healing that closeted inner queer child, particularly in the face of evangelical Christianity and homophobia. And then The Pairing is about discovering queer gender and queer joy, and like all of them are about queer joy and pleasure, but this one especially just like leans in on that. And so it's really fun to read and like be along for the journey. And I'm curious to see what McQuiston writes next. I was like scouring their social media today to be like, have they dropped any hints? But not that I've seen, unless it was in like a story or something that disappeared after a day. They haven't posted much about anything besides The Pairing coming out.
I think they have an idea for it already. Particularly reading these in the order that they were written, I feel like I've kind of grown with them, you know? And like, it's fun to kind of look back on the relationship, especially because we're like fairly similar in age and background. To kind of, look back on how these novels have related to different parts of our own lives. I think we both connect to them very deeply in different ways. Like I remember when we talked about Red, White, and Royal Blue, we each very deeply related to sort of opposite characters. I think you were like Alex and June, and I was like Henry and Nora. Though I do think I'm more like Alex than I realized, because I'm like, I don't think I would have enjoyed an entire book in his point of view if I didn't like really relate to it.
If you didn't relate.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So I need to re-examine that. Yeah, it's been very fun, and I'm excited. I also love that like the main character of every book, sort of excluding Shara Wheeler because that's a YA, right? But the age of the main characters.
I was gonna say that too. They age up every novel.
Every novel. They sort of.
They're like in college, recently out of college, like mid to late 20s. I think they're mid 20s. I think they're like 26 in The Pairing, something like that.
I think it's supposed to be like, you know, their Saturn Return or whatever, if you know what that is. I'm very excited to sort of continue on this journey. I'm like, we have so many more years of so many more, like, as we age, you know, what other more older romance things are we gonna, like, are we gonna have a book about marriage? I'm very curious. Or just, like, long-term partnerships. I would love that. Some kind of, like, you've been together for a really long time kind of story.
Sorry, I got really distracted by Saturn Return. I think mine's returning.
We're very much like I think we technically kind of missed it.
My Saturn return dates are March 7th, 23 to May 24th, 25, which, I mean, it's all the stories we tell ourselves, but what an upheaval time of my life, I will say. And I'm excited that it's going to end in May, apparently.
But I guess if Saturn Return is every 29 years, it's this year for us.
Yeah.
Oh no. Oh dear.
Okay, anyways, thank you for this tangent into astrology. What are we talking about?
What else Things would I want to see. See in a future Casey McQuiston novel as we age?
So, I would love to see more. I just love all the locations that McQuiston uses, especially in like One Last Stop and The Pairing. Both are super place sensitive, and I think exploring some cool places again would be really interesting because I like the way McQuiston situates us in time and place. I would love to see McQuiston have a character who has like a really spunky dog because McQuiston's bio always talks about their dog Pepper.
Yes.
Like that's like the last line of all their professional bios. And on Instagram they posted a picture of a really fun tattoo they got to like celebrate their dog. And so that would be really fun. And
maybe something in the past. Like there's a bit of it with One Last Stop and Jane, but I would love like a historical, like a queer history,
Ooh.
you know, like actually set in the past in queer history somewhere.
That would be fun. I mean, I loved them the way they wrote about travel as well. Yeah. So like I know these are like, I don't think they would put 2 travel books back to back, but like a road trip style book would be fun.
Let's follow up with the Callums, man. There's a lot of unexplored territory there. I need backstory. I need to know where they are in 5 years. Like,
I think when it comes to marriage, because like you're trying to find like the tension point in the plot for a character, especially if it's like a romantic book that's focused on like their romance, not necessarily like a married couple going through life together. I mean, I'll read anything McQuiston writes. If they want to write some fantasy, that would be fun.
That would be great.
Or like go further into magical realism, like they started with One Last Stop. Like lots of opportunity.
I think they could write a really great, messy polycule.
Ooh, that would be fun.
As the central romance. Either like introducing polyamory into a marriage that has previously been monogamous, or it's just poly the whole time. But I think they could do that really well. There's so much more.
So for those who are enjoying The Pairing, what would you recommend they read next?
You gotta read A Room with a View, or there's a really great Helena Bonham Carter film adaptation, if you don't feel like reading the whole thing. I'm pretty sure you can find or buy just the Beren and Luthien part of the Silmarillion, because that story is really, really compelling. The Silmarillion as a whole is a history textbook. So, unless you really want to know all the lore for thousands and thousands of years, and just a bunch of names and dates and places, just find the Beren and Luthien part, but it is really great. It's a really great story. And honestly, I was racking my brain. I'm like, where's the best place to find like extremely indulgent queer love with happy endings? And I'm like, the only place that you can really find that in spades is in like the BL industry. Thailand, Japan, Korea, Taiwan, sometimes China. Like, read Grandmaster of Demonic Cultivation if you want 2 people who are extremely bad at communicating about how much they love each other. So Victoria should not read that book. Moonlight Chicken, if you want like sensory indulgence and comfort and found family, if you want extreme horniness and messiness, Only Friends. Not that that is my favorite show, but if that's what you were missing, that's what you want, Only Friends is the way to go. If you are a queer person who is desperate for queer storytelling and you have not seen or consumed a single BL show, there's so much out there if you can read subtitles. Yeah. What about you? You've read a lot more romance than me, so.
Yes. So I feel like I kind of repeat a lot of the same authors, though. So I will always recommend Jasmine Guillory, Casey McQuiston, read everything they've written. But there's a newly debuted author, Becca Grishow, who wrote I'll Get Back to You, which is a really wonderful sapphic holiday rom-com. I mean, it's actually a Thanksgiving book, which is really fun.
Funny.
I actually went to undergrad with Becca Grishow.
Oh, wow.
And so we have not been in touch since a couple years after graduation. Ran into each other at a Lululemon. But otherwise, just supported her writing from afar. It's been really cool to see her get published with Penguin Random House.
Wow.
The book is also just a delight. It was one of my 5-star reads, even without previously knowing the author, of 2024. So really indulgent, sensory, fun, really silly. It's like a story that takes place over like 5 days.
Oh,
it's
wow.
just like a very dramatic, like take the like sapphic U-Haul trope and just condense it even more, like make it even more tropey of like
That's fun.
two people who used to know each other in high school who fell out of touch run into each other the Wednesday before Thanksgiving at a bar. Lots of tropes, lots of fun. Definitely recommend.
Cute.
It's been a second since we've recorded, so I had a hard time thinking about my currently obsessed. What have you been into recently?
My knee has finally been healed enough to do a bit of exercise, but I can't like kneel on the floor like I keto. So I recently discovered that there is a dance studio in Seattle, primarily for adults. They offer K-pop dance classes for adults at like all levels. So there's like a hard one.
That's so
that
fun.
like actually challenges me a lot and is like, it's really hard. It's great. I turns out need that amount of challenge in order to be engaged in my exercise. I need my brain to be working as hard as my body or I get bored. So I'm obsessed with that right now. And then I'm almost done with book 1 of TGCF, Heaven Official's Blessing, which just feels like gibberish nonsense words because like what is a heaven official? Is the blessing official, or is it an official of heaven who is given a blessing? I don't know. I don't know what this title means. I'm really loving how silly and bitchy it is. It's really great. How about you?
I have moved to Colorado, and therefore I have become the cliche. I have started snow skiing.
Oh, wow. Wait, I love that you call it snow skiing.
Okay, everyone laughs at me, but like I grew up water skiing. And so, like, we always would distinguish what skiing we were talking about, because the default in my family, if you're going skiing, is water skiing. But anyway, so I've been getting into downhill skiing. I also went, like, cross-country, like, Nordic skiing.
Ooh.
That was really fun, but it's basically, like, jogging.
Yeah, it sounds
Which
very
I'm
tiring.
like, this is fun, but it is, like, much more, like, I'm going for a jog versus, like, I'm letting gravity pull me down the mountain, and I hope I can not fall and die. I mentally feel calmer cross-country skiing, even though I'm working very hard. Downhill skiing is a lot of, oh no, oh no, relax, oh no, relax. But it's been really fun to get into and like a great way to like hang out with friends and live part of the Colorado culture. I see why it's a big deal. And you and I have been doing our own off-mic book club TV show watching of Love in the Big City, which is a K-drama and also been really great. We had to pause the other night because I was like falling asleep and couldn't read subtitles anymore, but we will finish it soon. It's sad. It's so sad,
really sad,
but it's also really beautiful. Yeah. Well done. Yeah. I'm so glad we were able to revisit this book that we have both enjoyed and talked about for probably several hours before we actually turned on mics. And it kind of makes me want to reread it, even though I don't really do rereads that often.
You can reread it just for my notes.
Just for the notes, yeah, that'll be fun.
It's like listening to the director's commentary and watching a movie that way. It's the Julia commentary read-along.
It's like when a book becomes old enough that they do like editorial editions. If you read the pairing, let us know what you thought. Hit us up wherever you find us on the internet. And please recommend more romance authors, specifically queer romance authors that you think are knocking out of the park, because McQuiston set a really high bar for me, and they can only write so fast. I need other things to read.
Yeah. We need to find more queer romance novels that we both like, because our tastes overlap very little in that genre.
Cool. Well, until next time.
We'll see y'all next
Happy
episode.
reading. I lost your audio right at the end, but...
Oh, I lost you.
Did you end the episode? Because I ended the episode. This has been an episode of Book Club with Julia and Victoria. A huge thank you to all of our members who keep the show going. You can also join the membership and support the show to receive special access to our film club, newsletters, and the archive of the first 50 episodes. You can find all that and more at buymeacoffee.com/bookclubwithjv. This episode was co-hosted and produced by myself, Victoria Bruick, along with Julia Clausen. Our music is composed by Greg Bruick. Our logo was designed by Gabby Febland. We want to know what you're reading and your bookish thoughts, so you can reach us at our website, bookclubwithjv.com, on Instagram at bookclubwithjv, or by leaving a review on Apple or Spotify. We'll catch you next time. Happy reading.